How you doing, guys? Today I'm going to continue my efforts in stretching this seat pan for my little Mule. Since the last video, I've done a couple quick things. Really nothing that hasn't been shown already. One, in the prior video you saw that I had my cut line already marked on the Fender. Just went ahead, die grind, used the cutoff wheel on the die grinder, cut it off. Obviously dressed the edges up real quick with the air sander. I made the top patch, tacked that into place. There's nothing really special about that other than making the pattern and then just kind of starting from the center and tack welding it from the center out because that fender kind of curves. The kind of special part, I guess, I mean, I don't even really consider it that special, but is making these bends, and ultimately this is the front, so making this bend so it can all kind of line up and we can have a kind of a coherent arc throughout this area. So to do that, what I did is obviously I made sure my measurement was 1 3/4 inches, just making sure that I'm staying at that measurement so the both sides are symmetrical, so to speak. Went ahead, made a pattern for this area out of a piece of manila folder. I'm going to transfer this pattern to a piece of steel, cut that piece of steel out, and then I'll show you how I actually made the arc. With the rough patch made, you can see that when it comes to this, it fits pretty good up in that area. Oops, sorry. It fits pretty good up in that area. Then I kind of line it up to the bottom here. I'm not too concerned about the bottom exactly how it fits. I'm just more concerned about how this kind of lays out. Now this needs to be pinched together just a little bit so that gap will disappear as this kind of gets formed. Now to make the arc, what I'm going to do is I'm going to heat the end of this up with my torch. Not super hot red, but you know, probably like a dull maroon. And then I'm going to use this side of this piece of railroad track to kind of hit it with the hammer to create the bend. That's how I did this side right here. So, and it's basically trial and error, up and down, up and down, up and down, you know, between this and the thing and the seat pan, just to make sure that it fits as close as possible. I will make a little mark with the marker, like, hey, the angle's got to be like right around in this area, and then from there I'll start doing the initial bend and then keep tweaking it until it fits, you know, darn near like 95%. So let me get going to working on that and I'll show you some of my progress. So just eyeballing it, I got the curve pretty close. Just kind of going back and forth, hammering it. Now I'm holding this with one hand, so give me just a little bit of leeway, but you can see that that's pretty close. The inside corner, this corner there is a little too sharp. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ease that bend up a little bit, but overall that should tack in pretty close and I'll be able to weld that in and then grind it smooth. So I'm just going to hit this with a couple light taps, just dial it in the last, you know, millimeter or two to make sure it's as close as possible. And then I'm going to just tack weld it in place and then we'll move on to what I think is the next step. With the patch tack welded in, you can really start to see how the front's going to look. I wish it had fit a little better just for complete transparency. For some reason, got a little bit bigger of a gap here. I think maybe my cut line came across. But the other thing that's kind of interesting is if you look at the gap here, or I should say look at the little jog, it's a little bit bigger on this side than it is on this side. This side is not quite as pronounced as this side. And I'm going to deal with this at the end. I may have to add a little weld to the end of this just to make that transition a little bit smoother. I may even have to add a little piece of metal to the bottom of it. But I'll get to that at the end. Like I said, right now everything looks pretty good. I just hit the bigger welds with the air sander just to knock them down so I can just get a better feel of how things look. And overall, it feels really good, and I think it actually looks pretty darn good too. I mean, the flatness of the fenders is just about the same. I think this one here is just a hair lower. I mean, when I say a hair, like maybe a 32nd of an inch, something to that effect, because when I put the level across the top of the fenders, they're almost perfectly the same. Now I'm going to go ahead and just spin this thing around without dropping it on the floor, hopefully. All right, so next is to make this particular patch, this bend on this side. Now, as you can see, this is a much smaller piece. I didn't try to recreate the whole bottom. And the reason for that is this. I want to try to recreate this, and after, I'll show you how I did this, but after some, you know, just like using a hammer and my vise, I was able to make this patch, which I think is going to look the part. Now, this is thinner gauge steel than what I'm using. I'm using 16 gauge for this piece, but this is, I think this is 22. Yeah, it might be 22. But I think once I kind of tack weld this in, this has to be brought in tighter. I think that's going to look the part perfectly. A little bit of body work, you'll never know that I did it. So I think that's what I'm going to make this patch for over here, tack weld that in. Then I'll show you how I made this, but obviously I'll do it for the other side. Then I'm going to tack this into place on both sides, and then I'll make this last little, I guess, parallelogram. I guess that's what that's called. We'll make that little patch, put that in, and then basically all the metal work is pretty much completed, and then it's just going through the task of tack welding it all together in a fashion that won't warp it too bad. Of course, my welder, I basically have no gas left, and with the COVID-19 crap going on, I don't know if I'm going to be able to, I got to figure out how the hell to go get gas, but for that right now, I got enough just to tack weld these pieces in. So let's get to it. This little patch that I made here is still screaming hot from the torch. Because this being 16 gauge, this is pretty hard. You can't really, I can't easily bend it, but I'll give you a rough estimate of what this thing's going to look like. Let's see if we can get this thing to focus. There we go. So it's right there. It's a little hard for me to hold it with the pliers here, but I'll line it all up and I'm going to tack this into place. It is a little longer than the patch on this side, but it really doesn't make any difference. So I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to take this outside, line it up, tack it in place, and then we'll take a look at the final product. I am going to let this thing cool down just a hair before I go doing anything with it. With the 22 gauge patch, I got it to fit fairly well. As you can see, I have the little line where I want the bend to start to go, or where the little body line is. Now, unlike this side, the first bend I'm going to make is the bend out. So in other words, bend this almost 90 degrees, but bend this piece out to me, and then I'll fold it down, and that's what's going to create that body line. On this side, I did it the opposite way, because how I'm going to use it in the vise. It's the only way I can do it. I did make one. I started to make this side, and I messed it up. It's all about geometry, and I'm not a big geometry nut. So you might understand why you have to do it a different way, but let me show you how I did this. First thing I'm going to do, like I said, is I'm going to make that bend. Basically going to fold it in a 90-degree angle, and then I'll show you how I set it up to make the compound bend. I'm using these little vice grip C-clamps to hold this piece of band iron from flipping up when I bend on this, because I gotta just barely clip the edge of the steel on the jaw of the vise in order to make such a tight little bend. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and bend this down, tighten this down really good, make sure it's real tight, and I'm going to bend on this down. And let me see if I can show you how I have. So you can see where the steel is right there, and I'm just catching the edge of it to try to keep that bend as tight as possible. And that's what these things are going to do. They actually, even though this is pinched in, even when I was pulling, there's just such a little piece. This thing kept popping up on me. So what I did was I went ahead and just clamped these vice grips to the edge of the jaws just to keep that piece from moving when I make the bend. So let me go ahead and make that bend and let's see how it comes out. After kind of rehammering it and bending it around a little bit, actually I got it to look pretty darn acceptable. I think that came out pretty darn good, actually. I know it's not quite perfect, but when you look at it at this angle, it actually looks like it's going to work out just fine. I'm going to go ahead and tack weld this piece in and the other piece in, and then we'll take a look at how it came out. Now, I welded these two little patches from the back side, and the reason for that is I didn't want to put weld in this area right here because it'd just be a nightmare to try to grind this, basically this line. I might have to, but for just to tack these in place, that's what I did. And they look pretty good. I mean, I'm not completely happy with it. This one's a little, I don't know, it's not high, but this just, I don't know. I think the other thing too is it hangs down, so it's a lot thicker than the other one. I mean, a lot wider than the other one. So I'll have to grind this down and make it nice and smooth. This one here, not bad. I'm pretty happy with it. But you know, I'll be honest, I'm not completely super happy with it all, but it gives me a good basis to do some body work in that area. It was going to be difficult for me to get those matched up real nice anyways. And even if I took another fender and cut it, there isn't enough straight edge to take, because I'll basically, this round line meets up with this line right here. So that's all the straight edge you have. So there's no way, even if I took another fender and cut it up, this is all curved. The body line right here kind of disappears. It doesn't ride on the side of the fender. So this was the only way I could do it, or I could just leave it flat and it would have looked ridiculous just flat. This, I think, gives me a good foundation where I could do some body work and make it look the part. All right, I'm burnt for today. We'll be back tomorrow at this. Well, the next day actually turned into about a week and a half. And the reason for that is my air compressor decided to spit the head gasket out. So I had to tear the air compressor apart and basically do everything I do to a small engine, clean the combustion, clean the chambers, replace the reed valves, head gasket, surface the head. The thing that's kind of interesting though is this guy is fairly old. Let's see if this thing will focus. There it is. Yeah, there's the date code, 1199. So I've had this thing since like 2000. So for 20 years, I think it still looks pretty good for 20 years old. I don't run the you-know-who out of it, but it decided to fail. So I had to fix it before I can get back on this. So that's what we're doing today. As you can see, I already cut the final little patches out here for these areas. So we'll be tack welding those in. The other thing I'll be doing is finishing off the edges here, so they're all nice and smooth. I got to put a little bit of a couple tacks of weld here, so that way I can sand this edge nice and smooth. I'll also have to do about the same here on the front. I'll just put some tack welds. I might actually put a little piece of steel in there and tack weld it in, so that way we can make those edges nice and smooth. So let me get to setting up and we'll get a few of these things done. Okay, so I started to stitch this thing back together. I'm doing it about an inch at a time. It feels as if the sheet metal, the thickness of this sheet metal is able to take that amount of heat at one point in time. So I'm kind of stitching it here, there, I'm going all over the place, staggering it all over the place, so that way we don't warp it. And then I'm just hitting it with the air sander real quick just to see how it comes out. And it seems to be buffing down or sanding down pretty darn good, and I'm pretty happy with it. I mean, it's not mint. Don't get me wrong here. We're not doing any kind of, super mint sheet metal work here, but in general, I think that looks pretty darn good. I think, once that's all ground down and smoothed out, I'll be in a better position to tell you exactly how it's all working out. But as of right now, preliminarily, first glance, I'm liking what I see. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to continue to go ahead and stitch this thing up. I'll probably come back on just before it's done, so that way you can see what it looks like just before it's finished, and then we'll go from there. So after not a full day, I worked on it in the morning, and then I worked on it later on this afternoon, this evening. But as you can tell, most, if not all, the welding is completed. I started to grind them down. I used the big electric grinder right there with the sanding disc to knock down the welds pretty good. You know, essentially this is what they looked like. Not bad, you know, just stitched up. Fully sanded, or should I say fully ground down, this is what it's starting to look like. And to be honest with you, I'm really happy with it. I mean, it's not that wavy. I mean, there's a couple little blibbity blops, but nothing that a little skin of body filler can't fix. And ultimately, that's, you know, what I was aiming for. Just straight enough so I could put just a little bit of body filler on it. These circles are where the welds got kind of ground down to a point where, you know, they're a little thin. So there's a little bit, this actually cracked because I ground it down so much, and then I was hitting it with the hammer to get it down. Same here, and then basically same along this area. So what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to stitch those up, but I'm going to stitch them up from the bottom, not from the top, because I don't really want to keep grinding on the top. I got the top down to where I think is pretty good now. There's a little bit of a high spot right here, thus the reason I went through, and there's a little bit of a low spot. And as you can see, it's just right there, but it's so slight that, you know, it's going to be just a, you know, paper thickness of body filler there. There is going to be a little bit of a body filler amount in here. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'll figure it out. Here, this crack is welded from the back side because this is that thin piece of metal. So next up, continue grinding so that way I can get all the little spots that I need to touch up all at once. I also still have to take care of these little divots, these little missing pieces. But all right, we'll probably be back at it tomorrow morning. Uh-oh, did I just jinx myself? Hopefully not. Next morning, with the basic surface grind complete, I'm liking what I see. I think the fender pan looks exactly the way I had envisioned it. I just have a temporary seat pan on there just so I can kind of take a look at how this is all going to work out, but overall I'm real happy with it. I don't think you could tell, or I don't think you would be able to tell, that those fenders have been extended 1 3/4 inches on both sides. Now it's not perfect, obviously. It is going to need some, you know, some body filler. I still have to finish fixing both sides. This is the last real fix-it. Just blending this edge out so that way it looks nice and smooth. But overall, I have these marks here. This is where I have to touch up weld it. I'm going to do it from the back side, not from the top. The other thing I need to do is I need to shorten this up. I'm going to grind this edge down to make this a little bit thinner because it's a little too thick compared to that side. And this side actually looks a lot better. As you can see, I must have been in a rush because what I did here is when I welded this patch in, it's actually welded in a little crooked. Like it was crooked. This is low. This is high. You can see there's a little bit of a line right here that needs to be re-welded from the inside. But overall, I'm real happy with the way this is coming out. I think it's gonna, you know, obviously I'll do a little bit of body work on where I welded it up and fix a couple dents, but all right guys, I think that's it for today. Even though I just started the day, I think I'm going to cut this video off at this point. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your interest. Please comment down below if you like this or if you don't like it. Like, share, and subscribe, please. And as always, have a great day. Thank you. Bye.